All right, hey guys, so this is my review of my time at Leonards Express. I was based out of the Idaho terminal that they got when they bought Holman, which was a different trucking company up in Caldwell, Idaho. Leonards Express is based out of New York. I'm sure you know that if you're watching this. Okay, let's start with orientation. So, orientation was mostly fine. Lindsay was the one who was handling orientation at the time. I think that was her last week doing it. She moved to safety after that, I think. I wouldn't trust Lindsay at all, honestly. She's kind of a two-faced kind of person, you know what I mean? You can't tell her anything that you don't want going to upper management. I'll give you an example. So I come into orientation, I think I was the only one there early maybe, and she ended up giving me my truck number ahead of time because I asked. So at some point during the orientation, you go out and you walk around a truck just so they can familiarize you with how their trucks are spec'd and how their APU system works on the Holman trucks, because the Holman trucks had like an electric one, which was weird. So it just so happened to be the truck number I was given. So I said to the mechanic that was showing us around, I was like, hey, you know, there's a leaking, what do you call that? A strut, like a shock, a suspension shock. There's 2 leaking suspension shocks. There's a crack in the windshield, and this body panel is about to fucking fall off, you know, one of the fairings. And he's like, okay, well, this is your truck, right? Write it up, stick the write-up in the windshield, and we'll get it. I'm like, okay. Anyway, so the end of orientation comes around, and I get pulled up into Rob's office. Rob is the terminal manager. They're like, we don't appreciate you going around and doing things before you're officially hired. I'm like, well, you gave me the truck number. The mechanic told me to write it up. I don't see how I did anything wrong here. All I did was mention to the guy that this was the truck I was assigned, that I was going to be driving after orientation. And he's the one who told me to write it up. So I did. I was following directions. And they got all up, well, you can't do that. You got to go through us. You're not officially hired yet. So that's the kind of shit that happens because Lindsay wanted to run her mouth about it to the terminal director. But I was like, okay, fine, whatever, right? I'm going to keep going and we'll, you know, I'll stick it in the truck and I'm not going to fucking deal with the terminal people. I'll just drive. So, end of orientation, my drug test never came back. So I had to sit there for another 3 days in the hotel waiting. And then they come up to me like, hey, are you sure you haven't done any drugs? Like, because you know, the guy might call you if you have a positive drug test. And I'm like, I'm positive. So anyway, on the drug test paperwork they give you after you take it, it's got like a lab and a phone number on there. So I call the MRO, the medical review officer. I'm like, hey, what the hell's going on? And he's like, oh yeah, so the doctor's office you went to didn't put the temperature on it, so they need to fax a form that says the temperature was okay when they took the sample. So, you know, that turns out to be a not my fault thing again, that they were pressuring me like I was on fucking drugs or some shit. Anyway, so that was over July 4th this past year, I think, when my orientation was. So I got a truck. It was an old Holman truck. It was a nice truck for the most part. It's like a mid-roof Pete with a full bull guard up front. Had fog lights, which was nice. I always complain about not having fog lights. Like, if you're gonna tell me you care so much about safety, then why don't you put fog lights on your truck? That seems like a common sense kind of safety thing to do. But the truck had the APU, and if the APU didn't work, it would idle. So that was nice. It was a decent truck. It had an inverter, I think a 2000 watt one. It went 68. It was a decent truck. It had super singles, which I wasn't fond of. Now, so they had this camera. It was called a Samsara camera in the windshield, and it had one that looked at you and at the road, and it had AI in it. So if you're not looking at the road, if you turn around and look at the bunk area behind you, the safety guy gets a notification. If you are looking at your gauges or the mirrors too long, the safety guy gets a notification. And it is in fact a camera that they can live stream, and they'll tell you that in orientation. So it's not like a fear tactic that I'm trying to do here. It's an actual thing they can do with those cameras. Anyway, I never personally really had a problem. Like, I'll be honest with you, if I wanted to text somebody something, I would just reach it. Like, my phone was mounted to the dash, so I would just lean forward, reach up, and type with my thumb, rather than picking up the phone where it could be seen by the camera, and it never beeped at me. So my buddy came to work there a couple of weeks after I did, and he actually got a nicer truck than what I did. But if you get a Leonard's truck, the Leonard's trucks have like actual APUs, and I think they have dualies. But so he was driving, basically they had him just driving back and forth between Idaho and Texas, which I was so jealous of because I live in Texas, and they'd never given me a Texas run. So I was kind of jealous of my buddy. But they called him one day and said, "Hey, we noticed you weren't looking at the road. You were looking at something else on your dash. What were you looking at?" He was like, "Oh, I was looking at my GPS. I was trying to figure out where I was going to stop for the night." And they said, "Okay, well, you can't do that. This is a warning. You can't do that anymore. Here's a video you have to watch." I feel like that's kind of overkill because, you know, sometimes things happen. You're in the middle of a drive and your trip plan falls through because now you've just run into 2 hours worth of traffic in New Mexico because some dumbass doesn't know how to take a corner and rolled his truck over. That's not something you can plan for. So now you got to pull up a list of truck stops on the GPS. Like, okay, where can I park? I've only got an hour left. What's within an hour's reach of me? You know, 70 miles or less. And so that's what he's doing. Okay, so they gave him the warning. About 2 weeks later, they pull him into the terminal and they said, "Hey, we want you to look at this video. We saw you not paying attention to the road again." And they sent him a copy of the video. I asked him for it, but my buddy didn't want to be in the video. I asked him to be here. He didn't want to be here. So they show him a video, and basically what he's doing is he's like, his eyesight is just below, like you can, because it has eye tracking, the camera, and it's like you're looking down. What are you looking at? And you can see him looking down for about 10-15 seconds. Well, he told them, and I believe him, he's like, "Well, I was looking at my engine coolant temperature and my engine oil temperature on the gauges because I was going up a mountain and I felt uncomfortable with how hot my engine was running." And they said, "Well, you can't do that. You have to look at the road. You're fired. This is your second warning." So they fired him over some stupid shit. And in orientation, they were like, "Oh, we're not going to bother you about stuff like that. Only if we see your phone in your hand or you're doing something really fucked up." And then they fire him over something like that. He showed me the video. I believe what he was saying. And even if like, I feel like every driver does this thing where they put their phone on the dash and they'll turn on like a podcast, or you'll turn on a TV show or a movie and listen to it. You're not staring at the fucking phone the whole time, but you're listening to everything that's going on, and you can go through a whole season of shit in like 1 or 2 days, you know? Because you can't just have nothing going on or constantly listen to music. You'll fall asleep driving 700 miles a day. It's just not gonna fly to just listen to nothing. So they fired him, right? And this is one of my best friends. So I go in there and I call the guy ahead of time, the safety guy, and I'm like, hey, I want to come talk to you. So when I get to the terminal a couple of days after they fired him, I go in there, I shut the door, and I'm like, hey, Will, we need to talk. So I bring up everything he said in orientation, and I'm like, so can you explain to me why you fired him? He's like, well, we don't have to give warnings, and we don't have to do this. This is an at-will company, and we can fire you for anything and everything. As long as it's not like a protected thing, we can fire you for any reason. And I'm like, well, I don't want to work at a company where I can just be fired at the snap of a finger because you don't like my face today. He's like, well, we're not going to do that. And I'm like, that's what you just said to me you can do. Otherwise, why the hell would you have said it, Will? And I said, remember in orientation, you said you're going to give warning after warning after warning and training session after training session after training session. You gave him one warning and then you fired him on some bullshit, some shit that shouldn't have even been an issue. He's looking at his gauges. Will, I've seen the video. And he's like, well, this is a safety issue for us and we take it very seriously, so you only get one warning. I'm like, that's not what you told us in orientation. But okay, do whatever the hell you want, Will. It's your company, not mine. I get back in my truck and I take a load down to Colorado, right? So, because it's refrigerated freight, Leonard's does. So, I get down to Colorado, I get a load back. They do like out and back stuff out of the Idaho terminal, at least. Like every load goes, and then you come right back to the terminal. I mean, their pay's not bad. But anyway, so on my way back, I get a call from Will. And he says to me, hey, the camera didn't notify us or anything, but I was just looking at your camera a couple of minutes ago, and it didn't look like you were paying attention to the road. What were you looking at? I was like, are we really going to play this game, Will? I'm not going to talk to you right now, Will. I'm driving. This is unsafe. I can't be on the phone while I'm driving. Click. I hung up. So at this point, I was like, yeah, fuck this. I quit. Now they're going to make an excuse to fire me because I brought up the bullshit that they fired my friend for. So I got back to the terminal and I quit. I left my truck, cleaned all my shit out, got a rental car, and I drove home. Fucking 15 hours straight. You know, you don't have to obey the hours of service in a rental car. But as far as everything, like, if they didn't have that kind of an issue, like if they didn't have the AI camera, because I don't mind a driver-facing camera, like the lytic system, where it only goes off or records if you hit the brakes too hard, you take a turn too fast, you're following too close, shit like that. It'll record. Not this one. It's always recording. Even when the truck's off, it's recording. And they'll tell you, well, just hang a hat on it. Like, why the fuck do I have to do that? Like, it should just not be recording when the truck's off. Anyway, if it wasn't for that camera, Leonard's would be a great company, especially the Idaho terminal. Because as much as I dislike the staff and their two-faced behavior, you don't really have to deal with them. All you have to deal with is your dispatcher. And you could just roll. Because they did have good loads. I mean, their loads were 1,600 miles plus almost every fucking load. You were doing 3,200 miles every week out and back. And they gave you $100 for a 34. So anytime you did a 34 when you're not at home, you got $100. Now, they don't pay detention pay at all, which is kind of fucked, because almost, I want to say 80% of their loads are live load, live unload. But that's just kind of the industry we live in, or we work in, rather. Their trucks, probably for being out west as much as they are, need to go a little bit faster. 70 is probably a better speed. I think they went 67, not 68, actually. their trailers were nice for the most part too. They had some of those like fiberglass sided reefers where if you backed up too hard to the dock, it crumpled up the trailer. And they had a couple of people total those in just the short time that I was there. So they stopped buying them. So the pay wasn't bad. The benefits were not super great. They were kind of not what you'd get at a big company, but better than what you'd get at like a lot smaller of a company like what I work at now. I think with 5 years experience, I was making 62 cents a mile, which is not horrible. It's not the best I've ever been paid, but it's not horrible. I don't know. It's a mixed bag for me. Like, I would go back and work at Leonard's in a heartbeat if they switched camera systems or turned off the driver facing one, because they use it as an excuse to get rid of people that they don't like or that they just don't want to deal with, or if you become too annoying, they'll find some reason to get rid of you. And I've talked to tons of drivers at Leonard's and they all kind of feel the same way. If you look at the Holman driver, the people who worked at Holman before Holman got bought out, they got camera covers because their promise, Holman's promise, was we're never going to put a driver facing camera in your truck. Well, so Leonard's decided to honor it by putting a cover over the driver facing part only until they got a Leonard's truck instead of a Holman truck. Well, now you have to, because you're in a Leonard's truck, now you have to do how our company operates. I'm like, that's kind of a ripoff. If you said you'd honor that promise, then you need to honor it for as long as they work there, because they're a Holman driver. They were hired by Holman, not by Leonard's. That's just kind of how I feel about it. Their yard up there, it's a dirt yard. It really needs to be paved. I swear, with super singles, you'll get stuck in the fucking dirt trying to hook up to a trailer. It's happened to 5 different trucks when I was there, and they had to get a yard dog to pull them out from under the trailer. The trucks are nice. They do train if you're right out of school. They have the miles to run you, as far as I was aware of or concerned. Their fueling, the way they do fueling is nice because they let you pick your own fuel stops. They give you like an app, and it tells you where you can and can't get fuel. So it makes trip planning a lot easier. You don't have to sit and wait in a line of like 40 minutes worth of trucks to get fuel every day. I don't know. Leonard's is a mixed bag. If there's anything that I didn't bring up in this video, if there's more that you want to know, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to elaborate in the comments. All right, thanks guys. Bye.